Hello. My name is Tony Ventrice. I'm with Badgeville. Today I'm going to be talking to you about what I call the 4 basic models of gamification. So I've been with Badgeville for about 3 years now, and it's been an interesting opportunity for me because it's allowed me to see a wide variety of different companies with different business problems, different goals, different scenarios. And part of my job as a game systems designer is looking for commonalities or patterns, ways of taking what is a pretty difficult task, gamification. I mean, you're all here because you're trying to learn more about gamification because it's actually pretty tricky and confusing, trying to reduce that problem into simpler problems, kind of getting shortcuts and getting to solutions a little quicker. Let's see if this works. Great. So I'm going to start with a question that's probably been asked and answered many times already today and yesterday, which is, what is gamification? But I want to look at it from a slightly different perspective, hopefully, than what you've seen so far, and that's from a structural perspective. My background's in game design. I think of things as systems. So we're talking about literally how we would build this thing, how gamification is structured. So this is, I think, where a lot of people's minds go. I call this PBL. This is points, badges, and leaderboards. And in a certain respect, this is correct. I mean, when you really kind of lift up the covers and look underneath, there's a lot of points, there's badges, sometimes there's leaderboards. But there's an error with thinking about gamification this way, or at least going to this immediately. And to illustrate that, I want to ask another question that's probably a little easier to answer for most people, which is, what is a car? So if I were to take the same approach with answering what is a car, I might say, the 3 most salient pieces of a car are the wheels, the seat, and the motor. So with that definition, these are all cars. So if I was saying, hey, I'm going to buy a car, which car should I get? How do you answer that question? Right? Okay, they all have wheels, they all have seats, and they all have a motor. Are they all the same? You know, which one of these is better for me, or which one of these is better for you or your business? And it's a difficult question to answer because you need to know more details. Like, what am I planning on doing with this car? Am I going to be moving heavy loads off-road? If so, now we have an idea of which car I should be going with, right? The truck. Or is my primary objective just to go really fast? Okay, go with the sports car. If my objective is to have fuel economy, right? Okay, well then it's an easy question to answer. So we can see a car is more than the sum of its parts. Right? There's an intent behind it, and identifying this intent is a big part of identifying which car is the right car. So it's the same thing with gamification. So I'm going to drop a few rules along the way, kind of rolling up little lessons as we proceed through. So rule number 1 is design from the beginning. All too often I see people jump right in the middle. They say, what are the mechanics? Just tell me the mechanics. I need a leaderboard. What kind of leaderboard do I need? It's like, slow down. That's step 3 out of 4. Right, we need to start with, what are your company goals? What is the business trying to get out of this? What is your end game? How are you going to measure that? What are your users' goals? And this is a tricky one, but this one's really important, is looking at this from your end user's perspective. What are they trying to get out of this? What are their motivations? This is usually either an employee or a customer. Then finally we get to 3, what are your methods? And determining what your method is then going to influence what your mechanics are. And then finally, balancing. And usually this is where people expect a game designer to come in and help out. But this is just kind of the end of the process. There's much more important questions to be asked early on. So these are the 4 steps you need to go through, and you really need to go through these in order. So step 1, company goals. Different companies have different problems. There's different solutions. So you really need to ask, what is your company trying to do? And I mean, one way of answering this is, oh, we want to make more money, or we want to save more money. And ultimately, that's what everyone wants. So you do need to be a little more specific. You need questions, or you need goals that are actionable and measurable. These are really the 2 goals here. So these are things like, oh, okay, I want to engage my customers for longer. All right, that's actionable, that's measurable, great. I want to convert to paid customers, right? I want to convert people that aren't paying into paid customers, great. That's also actionable. We can measure that as well. Get employees to follow the process, right? If you've identified what your process is, now this is something you can act on and you can measure. Train more efficiently or effectively. There's a lot of these. I just threw some 4 common ones up there. You probably have more than one. You really want to kind of sit down and think this through. This is important, and it doesn't take that many resources to figure out what you're trying to do and how you might measure that. Step 2 is your user goals. So what does your customer or your employee desire? People are sophisticated creatures, but this is an answerable question. I like to think of it in these terms, which is validation and rewards. Two things that people most crave in life is to feel like what they're doing is right, or that it's going somewhere, or that it has a purpose, right? And by patting them on the back and saying, yes, what you're doing matters, you're validating them. And then rewards, what can I get out of this, right? The transactional side of things. So when we look at validation, kind of comes in different flavors. I like to think of it as 4 different types or ways of validating. One is feeling structured, removing doubt, allowing people to feel like they are doing the right thing and they're not constantly questioning themselves. This is really important, especially in the workplace, is just give people an objective that they can track towards and let them figure out how to get there. If they don't even know what they're doing, it's a big problem. Feeling smart. People want to feel smart. They want to feel like they're learning things and they're becoming a better person with more skills. This ties into status, right? Someone who knows a lot of things is important to the community. They feel like they have value. Feeling successful. People want to feel like they're actually accomplishing things. They're making a difference. They're getting things done. And feeling valued. And there is some overlap in these, but feeling valued is really socially relevant. It's the focus on that social side of it, which is that if I go away, people will miss me. If I disappear and no one notices, that's kind of a hard thing for people to accept. So when you look at it from a user's perspective, or an employee's perspective, or customer's perspective, really take a little journey through your product or your context from their perspective. What are they trying to get out of this? Sometimes it's a very easy question to answer. Sometimes it's a little tougher. All right. With an employee, yes, they're collecting a paycheck, but why are they doing it with you versus another company? Right. What is this larger story that they're telling? What is their career path? I mean, once you put yourself in those shoes, it's actually a fairly easy question to answer. So rule number 2, we have these 2 approaches. We have validation and reward. Validation is always more effective, but it's less often used. And you might wonder, okay, well, if it's better, why aren't people using it? And the answer is it's harder to do. It takes a little more thought. Research has shown that extrinsic rewards lose effectiveness rather quickly. It can even change the context. You can take something that someone was doing for passion or intrinsic motivation, and it starts to go away and gets replaced with this monetary reward. Sometimes extrinsic rewards are necessary, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But just keep in mind, I think of them more as a last resort, not like, oh, the easy first thing to try. So defining the situation. We've got the first 2 steps, and you can kind of think of those as your context. If you understand what the business is trying to do and what the end user is trying to accomplish for themselves, you have an idea of what the situation is. So we'll walk through a couple of or 3 examples, and I'll discuss what the business is trying to get out of it and what the end user is trying to get out of it. So in this example scenario, we have a community knowledge share. These are popping up all over the place. It's basically taking something that looks kind of like Facebook and sticking into your business and hoping that people will answer each other's questions, write documents, kind of record their learnings, things like that. So the company's looking to improve productivity. They're hoping to get increased communication, faster resolutions, create documentation. What does the user want, right? Users, people have this desire to help each other out and share their knowledge. The only real obstacle is that it might get tiring. And the way you get around that is, you recognize them for their talent, right? This is what people are looking for, right? Validation, recognition. If you're recognizing every contribution that they make, they're much more likely to continue doing it. Let's look at another scenario. So employee expense management. So in this scenario, business probably has a lot of travel expenses. People are traveling, and they have policies that'll save them money. So things like reducing invalid expenses. Obviously, they don't want to be paying expenses for things they shouldn't be paying for. They want to combine reports, right? There's an overhead to managing all these expenses. So if you can get everyone to kind of condense their expense reports, that's going to help the company's bottom line. Overall savings in process and expenses paid, et cetera. So what does the employee want? Usually employees are willing to help out the company, but they need clear rules. They're not going to dedicate a lot of mental cycles to figuring out how they can squeeze a few pennies here and there to help the company out, particularly when we're talking about things like travel where they have to deal with the consequences of flying on a less desirable flight, for example. They want to feel a feeling of accomplishment. If I'm helping the company out, I want to kind of know how much I help the company out, right? If it just goes into a black hole, eventually I'm going to lose interest with this vague understanding of, yeah, maybe I could be doing something for the company. So, it kind of just goes back to structure and accomplishment, those intrinsic motivators I mentioned. One more example, so fitness or medical adherence. This is the idea that the company has some sort of fitness program to help people get in shape or stay in shape. The company wants sustained usage, whether this is a company that's offering this as a paid service, whether this is an employer that's just trying to get their employees healthier. Bottom line is they just want people to use it. Whereas what does the user want, right? Well, the user obviously wants improved health. It's kind of a win-win situation. So why do people not do this? Why do they not follow through with health training or physical fitness? And part of it is there's just not a very clear story of progress for them, right? Seeing results takes a long time. So it's lacking structure and it's lacking results, right? They need clear and simple instructions, and they need this feeling of progress. So going back to our 4 steps, the third step is methods. So we've got this set of all possible company goals, and we've got this other set of all possible user goals. And we put these two together to create our business scenario. How many business scenarios do we have, right? Do we have this overwhelming list of thousands of business scenarios? And what do we get when we combine these? Actually, we only have 4 basic models. So yes, we have different unique situations with their own little nuanced differences, but really, when we talk about how we're going to implement gamification, there's 4 broad approaches that all of these different situations funnel into. So we're going to talk about these 4 basic models. I call them community, performance management, competition, and redemption. So one thing I'd like to point out is these are not like little creatures I just invented. These all have real-world precedents. They should seem pretty obvious when we put them in the context of what they look like in the real world that you've already seen. So when I talk about community, I'm really talking about a system that highlights specialization, encourages cooperation, and focuses on talent recognition. You see this with military badges. There's lots of military badges, and each one recognizes some specific talent or a specific accomplishment. And if you're in the military, you can read these. It's kind of like reading a little resume. You can kind of identify what accomplishments this person's had, right? And the military is a big organization. It's a community. Performance management, this is really about scheduled performance. So a precedent is quotas, right? You always hear that the police have a ticket quota, and at the end of the month, you better watch out because they're trying to fill that quota in. You see a lot of this in the business world, sales quotas. Competition. Competition is really just, I like to think of it in terms of time. There's a performance metric over a certain period of time or a rolling window of time, and there's some sort of winner and there's some sort of loser, right? You're comparing users against each other or against some sort of benchmark. And finally, there's redemption. So this is what's kind of thought of as traditional loyalty. So do something, get something for it. Precedent would be like a sandwich card, right? Buy 6 subs, get your 7th sub free. So let's go through each of these in a little more detail, look at what these look like in the real world and some attributes of each. So when we talk about community, this is things like question and answer communities, like the knowledge share example I just went through. Workplace content creation doesn't necessarily need to be documentation. Oftentimes there's different types of content in different industries that you're trying to pull out of your employees. Affinity, so fan web pages where people are coming together just to kind of geek out over a common interest is a community. User-generated marketplaces, user-generated content. So even something like eBay is potentially a community. We'll get into the attributes and see why that is. So when you look at attributes of a community, you're rewarding people with social recognition. That was one of those motivators I was talking about for either their intelligence or their skill. It typically involves context of content creation. Doesn't have to. When you look at an affinity community, the content is really just communication. They're not really solving any problems. They're just talking to each other and geeking out over something. There needs to be a public visualization of earned status. So if you're building a status system, you need a public venue for people to see status and feel like their status is well known. Consistent effort to status balancing. So if you're creating multiple status systems, they need to feel equal. So if someone is an expert in this topic, or has been identified as an expert in this topic, it should be analogous to someone who's been identified as an expert in this other topic. So that was your first one. Performance management. This one should be pretty straightforward. This is typically in the workplace, so like sales or service performance, customer tiered loyalty. So like if you look at like an airline miles program, people are earning miles that they can redeem, but they're also earning status. So if you fly a certain amount of miles a year, you get platinum status, which comes with certain benefits. That's an example of a tiered loyalty system. Fitness training is very often performance management. Same with medical adherence. So the attributes of a performance management system, you have repeating scheduled tasks. And this is really important. If you can't schedule it, meaning you can't say exactly what you expect the behavior to be ahead of time, you can't really set up performance management milestones. It needs to be fair. If you're telling someone that they need to do certain things a certain number of times, you better be sure that that's actually an attainable value. It's not to say you can't set stretch goals, but you really need to understand what you're telling them they have to do. You need to reward people for success. You can potentially integrate extrinsic rewards into a performance management system, particularly for exceeding goals. Persistent record of significant performances. This one's important because it's scheduled. The whole idea is that the system will reset on some sort of interval to allow people to do it over again. If you create a system like that, people are going to get burned out if all of their progress gets wiped out periodically. So recognizing significant achievements, let's say it's monthly, you've broken your monthly goal, making some sort of persistent record of that is really important in a performance management system. How many times did you break your monthly goal? And then being able to compare yourself with other users, and particularly with your past performance. So competition is our third one. Possible scenarios, so we just talked about scheduled, so if we talk about unscheduled employee performance, the idea meaning there's no real upper limit to how much you do something. It's less predictable. Promotions, things that have a start and a finish. So we're going to roll a promotion during February, for example. That's probably going to be a competition. Competition doesn't necessarily have to be against other users. It could be against a benchmark. You could be competing against yourself. Events and trade shows, once again, because it's kind of a start-finish event, something like a competition makes sense there as well. I started getting at the attributes a little bit already. But yeah, having some sort of endpoint or a rolling status. So when I say rolling status, that may be, there's a monthly leaderboard, which really means it's the last 30 days. So there's turnover. There's turnover in competitions. Unlimited participation and opportunity. So I just mentioned this. This means that I can just keep participating, right? If there's a certain limit, guess what's going to happen? Everyone, or at least all your top users, are going to hit that limit. You're going to have a tie. You don't have a real competition. You certainly need to visualize standings. If people are going to be competing against each other, it's a moving target, so they need to see where they are and where everyone else is. Once again, you can potentially have extrinsic rewards for winners in a competition. It often adds that extra emphasis. Able to be instantiated or programmed. That's the idea I mentioned of having like a February competition. Obviously, if you want long-term benefit from this, you need to program the thing, so then you have a March competition, right? It's the kind of thing that needs a programming element to it to maintain over time. And then teams are a big consideration with competitions because it's very easy to opt out of a competition. You say, oh, I can't possibly win this. I'm not as crazy as those top people. But if I'm part of a team, it's a lot harder to opt out because now other people are relying on me to contribute to the team effort. Final one is redemption. This is probably the most straightforward. This is the one we're most familiar with traditional loyalty. There's really three ways of looking at redemption. There's earned entry raffles. So the idea here is that I do a certain amount of effort, I get in, but I have an uncertain payout. The nice thing about these is that you can offer a much bigger reward because you're not rewarding everybody, you're just rewarding a random winner. The problem is that it's uncertain, right? I may do all this work and get nothing for it. Coupon, earned coupon here, this is real basic. I do something, let's say I do a certain behavior 10 times, I get a coupon. This is like the sandwich card, right? Buy 6 subs, get the 7th one free. I know exactly what I'm going to get, and I know exactly what I need to do. These are expensive. The prizes tend to be cheaper to the point that oftentimes people aren't interested in the prize. And then the last one is earned currency plus a store. This is the idea of earning a currency, and then I can spend it on anything I want. So I have my choice. It's actually a little less literal than the coupons, but it ensures that it's more likely there's something I want out of the redemption. So attributes, you need a budget. I say limited alternatives because there's kind of no going back. Once you start paying people to do something, if you take that money away, they're going to flip out. It's a funny thing about introducing money to a situation. People don't miss money they never had, but they sure miss money that they do have. Economic contract, right? So you need to make sure that the effort for payout is interesting to the user. They're certainly going to think about it. Is this worth the effort I'm putting into it? What am I getting out of it? You need to make sure you balance your economy. Once you introduce redemption, you now have an economic problem to solve. If there is a loophole, your users will figure it out and they will exploit it. Clear, consistent payout goals. So if you're giving them something as a payout, that's kind of your big sell. You need to make sure they know what that is and that they get excited about it. So this takes us to rule number 3, which is the 4 models can be combined. So you've probably already noticed there's a little bit of overlap. I talked about extrinsic rewards and competitions. The truth is, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a systems designer. These are systems. Systems can be combined. It's just important to recognize kind of the complete unit of one of these models because it's got its own motivations and it's got its own rewards. And when you put them together, you still have these motivations leading to rewards. You're just starting to confuse things by mixing them together. Which is not necessarily a bad thing. So just like you can have multiple cars in your garage, you can have multiple systems underneath your overall system. Right? So if we take a look at my garage here, actually, this is the fire department. This just looks like the fire department to you, right? Okay, what is this? It's the fire department. There's some trucks. From the user's perspective, it's one program. They fight fires. From the fire chief's perspective, though, this is different, right? The fire chief has an inside view. So to the fire chief, okay, he's got his tanker truck. He's got his light response truck. He's got his fire engine. Each of these has a different purpose. He understands the cost of sending one of these out. He understands where each of these trucks is going to excel. So obviously, just calling these all trucks is fine for the end user. They don't really need to worry if he's got a complete system that can fight all fire scenarios. But to the fire chief, to the designer, he definitely needs to know what the purpose of each of these is and how it functions optimally. So if you know what these systems is, how do you deconstruct this situation and figure out which one is the right one? It's not the easiest thing to do. I have, I guess, an easy approach, or at least a technique I like to use, which is going back to what that end user is getting, focusing on what their experience is and what they're getting out of it. So with the community, it's really about the social status. They're getting standing in that community. In a performance management situation, it's really about applying structure. That's why it makes sense, like why you see it in like sales or in services, where they're doing the same thing very frequently. They just need a little guidance or a little structure to kind of help them keep an eye on the higher objectives so they don't get lost in the details. Competition is really about creating that feeling of victory and making that feeling of victory accessible to as many people as possible. And then finally, redemption is really about earned prizes. If you're giving them something, you've obviously got a redemption system involved. So we will go back through the examples and deconstruct them and figure out what the models are. So you remember these from earlier. So here's the community knowledge share. So what does the user want? Using my shortcut, they want recognition for their knowledge or their talent. This is a pretty easy one because community is in the name. Yes, it's a community scenario. Is there any performance management here? With a community, it's very difficult. You've got very creative, dynamic workers here. Trying to tell them exactly what they're going to do and how they're going to do it doesn't really map up. So it's not a performance management scenario. I mean, you do sometimes have roles, workplaces where there's an element of performance management and an element of community, but you just need to recognize those are two separate things. Is there a competition here? Actually, the focus with the community is creating cooperation, so competition is kind of counterintuitive. It's not what you want to do. And then finally, redemption. Are you paying these people to help out? I think that sends the wrong message, so I'd say no. This is really a pretty pure community play. When we look at expense management, what does the employee want, right? They want clear rules, and they want a feeling of accomplishment. So is there a community element to this? Not really. This is a one-to-one relationship between the person filling out the expense report, creating the expenses, and the business. You're not involving everyone else. Is there a performance management aspect here? This is the one that might be a little tricky because it looks like performance management. The problem is we can't schedule this. In most businesses, we don't know how often someone's going to travel at the beginning of the year. They might have 1 month where they travel a lot, and then they might have another month or 2 months where they don't travel at all. So in most roles, in most jobs, you can't really performance manage expense reports. So what can you do? This is where competition becomes interesting, is you have a potentially limitless input. Obviously, each person is limited by how much traveling they do. But you can create a competition out of it. And particularly when you make teams, you can make something that's fair for everyone. And then, is it an opportunity for redemption? Yes. I think the interesting thing about this is money is already part of the context. People are helping the company save money, so why not give them something in exchange for that? Give them a percentage of what they earned. Maybe it's not a direct, oh, you save the company $100, you get $10. But that context is already on people's minds, so it's not necessarily a bad thing to do here. So we look at fitness or medical adherence. What does the user want? They want improved health, and they want clear and simple instructions and an easy-to-follow sense of progress. So is there a community here? I'd say, yeah, potentially there is a community here. You're certainly going to get more adherence if people feel like there's other people that are aware of what they're doing. If you're trying to stick to a program and there's no peer pressure, it's going to be easier to drop out of it. And the positive side of peer pressure is there's a community support mechanism there. So if you can allow people to feel like they're becoming experts at a particular aspect of their health and that they can turn around and share that experience with other users, it's going to be a powerful motivation. Performance management, there's also an element of performance management here. A big part of this is clear and simple instructions. That's what performance management is all about. Here's the thing, you need to run 3 times a week. That's your goal that you've set for yourself. Okay, well, we're checking in on you. Did you log that? Did you exercise? You still have an opportunity to make that up. But by the end of the week, you need to do it 3 times. Is there a competition here? You could create a competition. I think it's a little aggressive. It kind of goes against the community. We're all pulling together. There's not really a reason to be competitive. We can all win together on this. I don't see a big reason to do a competition with fitness or medical adherence. There's really no enemies here. Everyone can win. And then finally, redemption, I'd say no, because it really changes the context. If I'm getting something out of this, I'm getting physical fitness out of this, you don't really need to muddy the message by saying, oh, I'm going to pay you to do it. Even if the company is getting a benefit. I mean, even if this is a company asking their employees to get healthy so that it reduces their medical costs, you don't need to bring that into the conversation. So reviewing, rule number 1, start from the beginning. What does the end user want? What is the company trying to get out of this? Rule number 2, validation is always more effective than the extrinsic incentives. Roll up your sleeves and really figure out what your users need or what they're trying to get out of the experience with your brand or with your company. Right? Where do they see value? And then identify that value and accentuate it. And then rule number 3, once you've identified your models, there may be multiple models. Don't be afraid of throwing out, or don't be afraid of bringing those together and multitasking. Maybe pick one, work on it, develop it, get a full system, and then introduce another one. I was told there's not really time for questions, so if you have questions, you can come find me. I will easily take on the challenge of deconstructing your situation if you want to challenge me. So yeah, thank you.